Okay, we're all set. Take it away, Gina.
Okay, and you see penguins, right?
Yeah.
All right. So as we start today, this is obviously that application part that we've been building upon till we got to this final part here. And as it is with IPA, we're really focusing across the board, not only with applying explicit instruction as an administrator, but also as that classroom teacher, instructional leader, coach, whatever you're doing. But this is that nitty-gritty part where we just kind of put a process in place so everybody has those opportunities to kind of think through what this might look like in their school. And many places folks are doing this, but this is kind of with that forethought of we're doing informal evaluations, right? And we're looking at informal ways of looking at what we've trained on, is it being applied in the classroom? So let's take a look real quick as we start for today. Obviously, we've got some quick outcomes we want to cover. We want to make sure we're going to explore and apply those procedures for doing effective and efficient walkthroughs. The one things we'll talk through is very, it's very explicit, but it really helps you think through how you might proceduralize this in your own space. And obviously we're going to look for specific things that what Anita calls are the look fors, and we're looking for things that emphasize improvements in that teaching and learning component of explicit instruction. And then again, it goes back to John Hattie's favorite word, feedback, 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 and thinking through what that might look like and how they've designed it and how we're going to share it with you to think through for your own purposes. Obviously, we got a little bit of an outline here today. So for those of you that are extremely detail-oriented and need to know, we're going to talk through some things, specifically that informal and formal observation piece, because I really want to stress that as we talk about walkthroughs, because everybody's contract's different, right? And so the importance of this is to reiterate over and over, this is an informal walkthrough. Now, mind you, if you have negotiated a contract that has specifics related to informal observations and you need to follow those, this may not apply. But that specific thing is these are informal things. It's not anything formal. It's not put into their evaluation. So I just want to kind of throw that out there at the beginning so folks kind of put that in their mind and thought through that before we got started. And didn't get too spun up over what the contract says. You definitely need to know your contract, but let's just kind of preface it this way for you. And again, here's who we're going to involve. We're going to be looking at principals, administrators, coaches, mentors, and other instructional leaders, however you have that set up with your system in place. And then again, it's looking at that quick snapshot, that one day, that one opportunity that you're in the classroom to see if the things you've trained upon as it relates to instructional behavior or curricular practices that you've worked on aligned to explicit instruction. You can go through and take those walkthroughs and see if you're finding those look fors. And again, we want to make sure that it's specific to help you out to provide feedback. And most importantly, too, at the very end, when we talk through some things, we're going to talk about how this is a quick snapshot of helping you design what that professional development might look like in your building coming up. It also helps you do kind of an informal needs assessment, right? So you can bring back topics to your group. And when you're planning out, I know for being a former director of all the title grants and applications in the state of Illinois, when you're thinking through what is my title programming professional development look like next year, these are those informal pieces that you can put in to your plan. When it says, did you do a professional development needs assessment? These might help that too, right? So the walkthroughs give additional data. As we always talk about, we definitely do the same thing at the first, because we want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to take all 6 of these together or one at a time. And so at the beginning, there's a few slides that we repeat. So bear with me, those of you that have attended the first 5 with us. But the first ones is obviously you're the group that affirms everything. It's what you already know. It's yes, we're doing it right, right? Sometimes folks need that gentle reminder, you know, what you had buried it due to the overload. That's the cognitive overload. We're going to talk a little bit about that next session. Actually, the last hurrah will be about cognitive overload. And boy, won't that be appropriate when March rolls around. And that's that part where, oh, I remember that, but it's somewhere in the back of my mind. I appreciate the reminder. And then we're going to expand the concepts that you're familiar with. So maybe you've all been trained, but you're going to say, oh, I didn't know that part of it because I only had, a couple hours training. And we try to go pretty deep on these. And if you need additional assistance, you can always reach out to me because I'm just an email away and I can reach out to you if you need anything else. And then applying what you've learned, right? So every time we try to talk through some things, but we put in a lot of application into it as well. And we try to have you share out, but sometimes we're so content rich in these because it's a pretty deep topic that we don't get as much interaction as we'd like, and chat box limits us to that. But hopefully today we'll get a little bit more chat in. And so those are our purposes. We talk through this active participation. It's huge with explicit instruction. And when we talk through it, it's really hard on webinars, but I put these in because maybe you guys have opportunities to do things in training as well. It helps you when you go to create trainings to think through some of these things and include them in your trainings as well. And making sure that we do have some active participation. So for us, most of it will be the chat box. We like to use the reading portions, but we've not really been able to do that a whole lot because obviously you're muted and I don't get a lot of interaction that way. And so, but it's those things that are put up here as strategies that you can use for active participation. And it's good strategies to use with students and teaching your teachers what to use with students, right? So those are things that we've included here. And today we'll probably mostly you'll be doing notes probably and taking some quick responses. And then obviously, hopefully some best practices and reflection and obviously using the chat box to have some conversation. So let's go ahead through here. And then everybody always asks, well, how did you get involved in all this? And I was lucky enough to work with Dr. Archer, actually Anita, and she tells you to call her Anita, but I always call her Dr. Archer. She's the one that's kind of behind this push for explicit instruction and really wanting to make sure that her life's work. I think Anita's late 80s now, but she's like a 60-year-old fireball that travels throughout the country still training people and showing them explicitly what her ideas are, along with our research partner that was Dr. Charles Hughes. And we were lucky enough to go out and be with Anita for a week. We trained through all of what she had at that time was in 2012. And every month since then, she has a monthly webinar with all of her trainers across the country. And if you can't make it, she always sends information and the recording like we kind of do here to give you that opportunity to learn at your own pace. And so the information shared here is stuff directly from Anita and things that she's provided. And again, we talk about it in case you haven't been with us. Explicit instruction, there's a lot to it, but it's very much common sense, right? And it's not rocket science. It's like, oh yeah, I knew that. I don't need more information maybe, or maybe I do need just a reminder, like we said at the beginning of that information at the beginning of the webinar. But it's obviously one of these really powerful tools that we have available for teachers. And we want to make sure that what we're doing with it is making sure students have those bigger academic gains and a positive, respectful environment. And that's a huge thing with Anita. She wants to see kids really nurture their success and learn at their optimal capacity. And it involves that systemic, direct, and engaging success-oriented model. And so she doesn't want kids to struggle. I call it the baby bear effect. You want it the just right model. And she's really, really focuses in on that if you ever get an opportunity to see her in person or see her on video. She has some underlying principles that's part of explicit instruction. And these don't sound, again, this is not rocket science. We're going to look at optimizing engaged time on task because again, she always tells us avoid the void or they will fill it. So it's never a good thing when students fill time off of task. It's normally a disaster or it's not a day that goes well for you. And we want to make sure that we have high levels of success. So we want kids being successful at what they do in that model that we promote. And we want to make sure that they practice the right way before we push them on to do homework and instruction as independent practice. We want to increase the content coverage, right? But we want to do it if it's new information, if it's information that's not been presented to students before. And we want to make sure that we use these instructional strategies for that because there's a place for explicit instruction. It's not for everything, right? And we want to make sure too that we move kids into instructional groups, but that takes thinking about how we manage our classroom, how we manage planning, all the parts that are part of explicit instruction that we've talked through a little bit and we'll cover a little bit today. And then again, the big piece of scaffolding instruction to build that student success. So we build their capacity. So we build their feeling that they're getting it, that they're able to move on to independent practice. And that's through what we call the I do, we do, you do part, right? So those of you that have been with us understand that. And those that you haven't, we'll cover that a little bit in a few minutes. And then obviously we talk about different forms of knowledge and when to use explicit instruction. It's not for calculus students that have already mastered something and they're moving forward. That's not an explicit instruction opportunity, but it is for opportunities when we're presenting new information or difficult information that students haven't been exposed to or limited background information. Always point this part out to everybody is understanding that there's direct instruction and there's explicit instruction. Explicit instruction is basically falls underneath direct instruction. And direct instructions, I would say like a differentiated form of explicit instruction. It involves a whole curriculum when we talk about direct instruction. And explicit instruction is like an instructional component that falls underneath that as a tool. And so if you can think of the big umbrella would be direct instruction, the little umbrella prong underneath it would be the explicit instruction, and that's what we cover. So far, anything so far for anybody that's new, any questions before we start? I always like to make sure, because we do always have new folks. And like I said, the other folks get at least a few minutes to kind of get their drink in order and put their stuff in place because they've been with us for the other things. But if there's any initial questions about direct instruction, explicit instruction, anything that we've talked about briefly. Okay. Seeing none. And if it comes up, I'll go back to it actually. We'll go ahead and get started. So for those of you that do classroom walkthroughs currently, I'm sure there's a focus, there's a process, there's a procedure. There's probably in some instances a negotiated piece of what walkthroughs might look like. For this purpose and for what we're talking about, this is directly related to explicit instruction. I'm going to bounce to the chat real quick. Great question, Erica. How can we get together to access missed sessions in the series? They're all recorded, and I'll have Arlen. Yep, perfect. Thanks, Arlen. And so when we go through the components of the classroom walkthrough, we're going to just talk through some easy steps. So obviously, again, we're going to reiterate it's an informal and brief classroom observation. You're not camping out there all day. You're not hanging out for an hour, but it's those things that you've talked about and worked on as a team or as a school to go through about what is, what are those components, those underlying things of explicit instruction that you're really focusing on in your building to implement this. Again, it's not part of a formal teacher evaluation process. I can't highlight that one enough. Don't make that mistake if you're new. It involves principal, administrators, coaches, mentors, other instructional leaders, and teachers. It provides a quick snapshot of instructional behavior and curricular practices. So we could look at any of those aspects. And again, we're looking for those look-fors that emphasize improvements in teaching and learning, right? It might be on the teacher side, it might be on the student side, but those look-fors that relate directly to what we've coached on an explicit instruction and decided are those important factors in our building, in your building that you're looking for to help implement explicit instruction. And then that providing feedback to teachers on instructional practices. I'm sure all the administrators in the state of Illinois have gone through specifically a bunch of training on feedback, as it's probably required for you to have your administrative license, if I'm not mistaken, but really thinking through how you take observational notes that aren't judgy, right? You can't have the judgment in them. It's just a matter of fact, Jack, here's what I saw, but in more, pleasant language in that. It's just very factual. And so it's trying to make sure that you convey to your staff, it's that informal professional development at the building level, right? So we're going in and having that opportunity. We've decided this is what we're going to focus on. We're going to have that informal observations. We're going to give you feedback, and it's going to be quick. It's not going to be this drawn out thing. And we're going to make it as smooth as possible and try not to interfere in the instructional practices as possible as well, right? Because I can hear everybody out there already, oh, just another interruption in my classroom. I really don't want folks to think of it that way. It's trying to think through what it might look like to have these opportunities to have conversations around teaching and learning, right? So let's go ahead and get started. Oops. So if you guys could, in the chat box, talk to me a little bit about the walkthroughs that may be in your building that have occurred. Are they informal or formal? Did you get feedback? What did it feel like? Was it beneficial? Has anybody in the group here today had that opportunity to participate in walkthroughs that were informal, where feedback's given? What was it like? Did you enjoy it? Did you grow professionally? Or were you like, boy, this is a waste of time? And trust me, I got no dogs in the fight. Just trying to see if anybody has any information they'd like to share about what's gone on in their space. It helps others learn. Catherine, thanks for sharing. She's done some walkthroughs. The look-fors were predetermined, absolutely. And teachers were aware. They were helpful to guide our department meetings. And spot on. That's those kind of things that we talk through. Like, so if you're implementing explicit instruction, there's some very explicit things that you're looking for when you come through. And that's what you're trying to see, because it's that implementation piece, right? We're checking to see that what we trained on, we're getting our bang for our buck, so to speak. And teachers are really feeling like what they put the time in to learn new things is being put in place, and that people are giving them helpful feedback. Informal feedback, great, that's excellent. Yeah, you don't feel like you're held accountable if you mess up, right? Because it's not related to your evaluation. I know that's terrifying for everybody. Amy, thanks for sharing. She rarely had one, but only got feedback once. As an administrator, I have given walkthrough feedback some of the time. Got it. Thanks for sharing. That's perfect. Dawn shared that she did not so much for giving feedback. Our focus was collecting data and looking for specific to the behaviors we were looking for. Sure. So if you're doing functional behavior assessments or looking through things in the classroom that you're looking for, sure. Informal, great. Got to see quick snapshot of curriculum and implementation. Absolutely. I tell everybody that. Always give a feedback. Anonymous data gathering to see trends, gathering instructional practices. Great. Oh, great. Your building does look for us. I love it. I lost you real quick here in my thing here because somebody typed real quick. Your building does look for us and teachers are given surface level feedback, not in depth. Well, that part is a bummer for you, Scott. Okay, so you do the look for us, but it could go a little deeper. I see what you're saying. So maybe today's going to help you with some of the procedural pieces that you might want to implement. We did informal walkthroughs at the junior high level several years ago. We met as a group immediately after and shared wonderful and positive feedback. Sometimes it's not always wonderful and positive. Have you ever been there? But you do have ways, and we're going to talk about that, of how to provide that feedback. Because again, it's very matter of fact, and you kind of let that person receive the information in as most positive way as possible. And you kind of put it back on them and coach them through that process to say, hey, so how did you feel that went? And sometimes it's painful, right? And sometimes it's great. Let's see here. Let's see. Completed based on implementation of new concepts, curricular tool, used a template, shared trends and goals from the results, and then complete a follow-up set and saw some of the goals being accomplished. So good. I see the sum there, the qualifier. Right. So when we go through these things and we implement new programs, this is that key component that we forget about, right? So we want to make sure people are implementing, but at what level of implementation do we find it's okay? And we say we train on this thing and we put thousands of dollars in it, but then we have no kind of, and I don't want to say accountability in a bad way, but accountability in the way of how does this look? Is it working for us? Do we need to tweak some things? Because it's not just about the teachers. And is it systematically working for us? Is it going where we want it to go? And how do we gather that data? And what does that look like informally and formally, I guess, if you wanted to at some point. But this is definitely not for the formal process. Great. Thanks so much. That's perfect. That's what I wanted to hear. So we have some folks that have had that experience and had those things to differing degrees of success, and some things that have just been exposed to it. So on this, again, we're going to reiterate, you're going to see that word so many times, you're going to be sick of it. It's that informal and brief. We don't want this again. You're not camping out. You're not hanging out. 5 to 15 minutes tops. You're in the classroom. That makes it manageable too to schedule, because I always hear, oh, I'm so busy. Well, everybody in the world's busy. But if these things are important, and if implementing explicit instruction in your building is important, anything that's important gets time tagged to it. Anything that's important gets money tagged to it. A resource goes with it. People know it's important. So that's that piece where this is not overwhelming or too much, but it does give you a better lay of the land, and it builds rapport and relationships with the staff that you have as well, because you're really taking an interest in what they're doing and trying to help them be better at what they do, that professional growth. They recommend, like again, Anita recommends a walkthrough at least every 2 weeks. Now, some of you folks might have a building that's huge, but maybe you divide and conquer amongst your team. But that's a little bit of conversation around calibration, right? You always have the one person that's really strong in instruction, and the person that's the bean buses and biscuits that I always call, that the person wasn't as, I don't know, well-versed in instruction that they should have been compared to everybody else. So you'd have that mismatch, or that lack of, I don't know, the lack of calibration that you really needed. So you really all have to be on the same page on who's doing this. And that just takes you meeting enough together as a team and talking those things through of what you're looking for, those look-throughs. A flexible schedule, right? Don't get bent up. If you don't make it up to the day that it is, you explain to teachers, something comes up, it comes up. But you're really pushing it to help them grow professionally. This isn't about an evaluation. This is about their professional growth. And it helps you as an administrator be a better instructional leader. And the team may or may not choose to announce walkthroughs. That's all up to you. Again, that's procedures that you kind of make up to your own area. Here's the thing. You could announce it or not announce it. If a person's a good teacher and they're really working on it, they're going to have it going when they need to or not. I mean, do you really not need to announce it? I mean, I always announce it just because it made people feel a little better. You know, folks that are struggling, you're going to see that it's going to come through the time that you're in there. And so you're never able to camouflage it that long. So that's all up to you though. Like maybe that's part of how you schedule things, and maybe you like to have informals because you can fit into your schedule a little easier that way and not have, you know, super flexible schedule versus a scheduled, hey, I'm going to be in kindergarten grades on Wednesdays and, you know, fifth grades on Thursdays. Never go on Fridays. Boy, that's rough, isn't it? Sometimes to get, you know, or the day after Halloween or the day of Halloween, Candy Express, but trying to think through those things too and giving some grace in those instances. And then again, not a formal teacher evaluation process. So these things shouldn't even come up in their evaluation. So don't say, oh, remember the time I was in your classroom? You totally lost the trust of the teacher. So you're building up trust and rapport. They're inviting you in so you can see what they worked on. You're giving them feedback immediately. So that, you know, they're taking chances and doing the new stuff that you've asked. And so it's that give and take relationship. So again, as soon as it shows up in their evaluation as a negative or whatever, you kind of lose everything that you've kind of worked for. So it's not an aha, I got you. It's definitely, we're in this together. We're walking shoulder to shoulder and trying to work out what's best for kids. Okay. So when we think about the other people that we might want to involve, we're going to have the principal, other administrators, coaches, mentors, anybody else, any other titles that you might use. It's all about applying it to explicit instruction in this instance. So not that you couldn't take this and insert something else into explicit instruction, but specifically the things that we'll look through in the coming slides will be directly related to those things that we're implementing for explicit instruction. So again, we've talked about it a smidge, but 2 individuals on walkthroughs, and I'm going to bounce to the chat box real quick to make sure nothing for me. Nope, it's at Heartland, so we're good. And so those 2 individual walkthrough folks that are doing walkthroughs, there's just 2 sets of eyes. And if you don't have 2 sets of eyes that are 2 administrators, then, you know, whoever you rely on, maybe it's the guidance counselor or somebody that has instructional knowledge would be somebody that you want to. So, you know, you confer, you make sure you see what you see. You both observe, you compare observation notes. So you might step to the back or step outside real quick, briefly, and have that conversation. And did you see the same things? Sometimes you don't. I don't know what to say about that, but there have been times that I used to do observations of schools across the state for school improvement reasons. And sometimes we come out and I'd be like, must not have been the same classroom as that person. So that always comes up, but there's ways to resolve that, right? So you think through those things too. You're pre-correcting for any kind of error that you might come up. If you're the building principal, especially calibrating that message and the things you're looking for and training those observers on what you're looking for before you go out into classrooms is critical. So we'll talk about that too. And this is the interesting part. So whoever, if you're a pair, one person stays back and provides the feedback to the teacher, and the other lucky observer steps into the classroom and either steps into the lesson or provides the kids an opportunity to do question and answer, or however you set that up. But that's kind of the understanding when you train your whole staff of, when we go to do these walkthroughs, be thinking through what it is the person does as we walk through, you know, just, and we might have that conversation that there's a standard thing that you do a question and answer, you talk about what's going on in their classroom, and that person in the classroom just simply has a set of questions that they ask kids as they're in there. And again, all informal, nothing's formal. And then the other gives feedback immediately to the teacher. There's no waiting around. There's no, I'll send that to you in an email in a couple days. You know, no, it's feedback, it's verbal. And you can obviously send, you know, what your notes are to them so they have that, so they can reflect upon it. Because some people don't process that fast, right? And some people process in writing, some people process verbally. And so it gives them 2 opportunities to get the information and receive the information and think things over, like, maybe I could have done something better, or to have conversations with somebody else about. Again, initially, it should be administrators or someone in that instructional leadership role. You don't have to have a type 75 per se, but, you know, starting there's a great spot. And then bring it down to coaches, and then coaches and teacher leaders. Now, some folks are small, so I totally get it. You know, you may not have a coach, but you might have a teacher leader. Then you do what makes it work in your system. So, but again, that calibration and talking through what it is before you go out, the checklist that you're going to use and look at, and really talk through it as a group to say, this is what I understand blank to be. And so you go through and have that big talk through before going into those classrooms. And so sharing those opportunities with everybody. So you have that, common ground, common calibration, because I'm sure you have this too. If you're a bigger building and you have several administrators that do evaluations, you've had that where depending on the year, maybe somebody evaluated one time and one person was really on the ball and the other person was okay at evaluation, but not great. And so you had that mismatch where now people work really hard at calibrating their responses and giving quality evaluations back to teachers, or at least they should, right? That's what we should hold principals and that to that specific level of giving good feedback back in evaluations. So they're able to professionally grow when they receive the information. So when we think through what some of those things might look like, we're going to look at instructional things in the classroom when we're doing those walkthroughs. Curricular practice, maybe we implemented a new math curriculum and there's specific things that are related to it that we want to make sure are being applied as it relates to something. And again, behavioral practices, there might be something that we've implemented related to that. But again, the components of explicit instruction that we're looking for are these specific things we've agreed upon. Or you can talk through specifically, whatever these components are, because we can break ours down into these categories as well. But this gives you an opportunity to think through what that might look like in your classroom or in your school building. So again, instructional practices, curricular practices, and behavioral practices, and what you might look for. And it might vary from kindergarten to, 5th grade might be looking at instructional or behavioral, and you might vary it up. And 6th, 7th, and 8th grade might be looking specifically at behavioral practices and, instructional things. So it doesn't have to be all of these. It could be one thing. And it's whatever where you're trying to gain some leverage and get some growth. And so if you feel like you've invested a lot of money into something and you're wanting to make sure that what's been trained upon is being applied where the rubber meets the road in the classroom and that you're getting some growth from students and from teachers, that's the areas that you're thinking through in your mind of what we're going to do walkthroughs on and what we're going to focus on. So far, we've given you some things to think about. And you've had the opportunity, again, some folks, this is new, the walkthrough idea. Some folks, this is, old hat, got it, I'm getting it. Is there anything you think about as the receiver of this? Have you felt like it was is it worth your time to invest in providing the feedback necessary? And is it, have you participated in something? And we've kind of talked through it on the previous slide, but after you hear all the stuff specifically, now that you know all the components that we talked through, has it been anything like this specifically? 2 people come in, 1 takes over the class. Anybody with those kind of components that you've had anything similar to this, almost like the steps that we've shared? And no big deal if you haven't, I'm just curious. And no worries if there's crickets today, it's all good. Because I think systems are all different and people implement different pieces of walkthroughs differently. And some of them use it as professional learning communities. They have walkthroughs related to that. So specifically for a process like this, where 2 administrators, because it's, it's labor intensive, but I always tell administrators as I coach to be, how do you get the most change? How do you become a teaching and leader? Is you're out in the building and you're, instruction, right? And you're seeing things that take place. So Amy, thanks for sharing. She's currently an assistant superintendent and here today to refresh and learn so she can help principals implement this. Right. There's so many things on our plate. And I'm so glad you said this, because it is about a refresher. It's like, oh yeah, we were balancing all these plates. This came along, this came along, this came along. And we've been doing everything online for the last 2 years. Oh yeah, we need to, how do we do a virtual walkthrough? Which you totally can, but let's not talk about that because we're on Zoom today and, I don't want to make anybody have to do those kinds of things, but there's definitely ways you could do it that way. But I'm so glad it's the refresher for you. And it is that look for us because it's all this informal gathering that builds that collective whole that everybody buys into, that you feel that you're supporting your staff. They want to feel like, okay, if they're visiting our classrooms and taking time, this is important. It's not going to go away tomorrow. So again, how can you, get to that point where you're able to do that? So thanks for sharing, Amy. That's perfect. Okay, so let's go ahead and keep going. So on here and what you guys, I'm probably making a car sick here, but one of the things I wanted to share is I broke down the worksheet that you all have. And so there's 2 documents that came. Arlen put it on there. You have the, obviously the PDF for the slides, and then you have the Word document. And I've just kind of broken it apart so we can talk about it. But there's a 1-pager in there that has all these on it. So you don't need to write it if you have that with you. But these instructional look-fors that we're looking for, emphasizing improvements in. And so everything on the left-hand side is what obviously in this section is talking about instruction. And so we're looking for specific things, and it would be all those things in black: the learning intentions, attention, lesson structure, explicit input, frequent responses, equity of individual turns, adequate thinking time. And so on this first 7 things we're going to talk through, these are some of the things that we're looking for. So for folks that, need a starting spot, that Word document is just for explicit instruction. Some of the look fors that if you're in the teacher's classroom, these are the things that would directly relate that you should have trained on, right, for explicit instruction. And so making sure that everybody has that idea in place of, okay, so what I would do, this would be twofold. I'd use that sheet to train whoever's doing the observations, right? So we would go through it and we would talk through and I know this sounds ridiculous, but what does a learning target mean to you, right? So I don't know if you've had those books, but everybody, again, what's an objective versus a learning target? What does that look like in our classrooms, and how have we trained folks? Now, if you go through some of these and you start seeing that no one's doing, like, say, learning intentions, that's kind of a reflection. And that bigger piece is that we just shared, that Amy just shared, is they use that soft data for other things. That's like, we need to revisit learning intentions, right? And that's a quick thing. We don't wait till we plan a professional development session, but we can easily send out an email on our weekly memo. It says, hey, remember guys, we're working on learning intentions as it relates to explicit instruction. Here's a quick video, or here's some things, an article on it. So we can I know when we were doing look fors, folks wanted to know a little more about it. And so I'm going to provide some information really quickly about it. Or I might provide it quickly to that teacher that I'm going to follow up with when I do that. So what we're looking at then is instructional observation, obviously, and these are the first 7 things that we're looking at. I don't think I need to go through and read each one to you, but everybody here gets the idea. And if you've gone through the other videos, kind of go into detail as well under each one. And, obviously, I know some of this sounds so silly, but think about it. Have you been in a classroom when a teacher taught a lesson and there wasn't an opening, a body, and a conclusion? And, the big thing is the conclusion, right? The bell rings and kids are out the door. And that's especially middle school, high school, right? You're caught up in the moment, and I get caught up in the moment on the webinars, right? And I'm like, oh my God, it's almost time to wrap up. And so I have to say to myself, okay, I got to get to the closure side, bring us all back together and have a quick debrief so I can anchor what they've just done before I shove them out the door, right? And they don't become late to the next class. And so when we think through all these things, this explicit input is the important part, right? We provide explicit input on critical knowledge, skills, strategies, and vocabulary. And I find that the vocabulary part is super powerful for explicit instruction. It takes away a lot of those things that kids don't know. So it doesn't matter where you're at in the hierarchy of advanced, to advanced placement students to students in the general classes. It doesn't really matter if you don't have the background knowledge to know the words that we're doing. That's where explicit instruction really comes in pretty handy. And that we're using that I do, we do, and you do appropriately in the classroom and as we build those lessons. And we'll talk a little more about frequent responses and things like that, but let's keep on going. And as we continue through that sheet, we have monitoring responses. So we're looking through how students respond to the teacher, right? We're circulating around the room, we're sharing, and our kids allowed to share with partners, right? It's quick. Think, pair, share, or share with your partners, talk. You got 30 seconds, share out what you had. And it's that pace, perky pace that Anita wants in the classroom. And so thinking through all those things that come together for explicit instruction on this one, basically not a checklist, but kind of a checklist that you can work off of for those look fors. And so I always tell everybody too, that informative feedback or error corrections, I don't know if any of you have been in a classroom where you're like, oh my goodness, that kid has been on the board doing the math incorrectly for the last minute and the teacher didn't quite catch that. And sometimes that happens in classrooms where, you're in a small district that the teacher isn't versed in new math or whatever you want to call it. And the students out there doing it incorrectly. And you know that that's not how they're supposed to be doing it. And you see that, and that's a conversation to have, like, how do we correct immediately when students have those kind of issues as they're doing work, right? And that we don't let them practice it wrong for so long that it creates a whole gamut of other issues, because practicing it wrong in math, especially in anything, but math especially, takes you 2 to 3 weeks to correct. So catching it early is pretty important. And again, it's affirmative feedback. And again, it's not the attaboys, but it's specific things related to the work they've done in a brisk pace, quirky pace, whatever you want to call it. And that rehearsal part of letting kids practice it too with you. Again, it goes back to I do. I'm going to do it in front of you, the lesson. And sometimes it's I do. Oh my God, I'm still doing it. I'm doing it because they're still not catching on. So I have to change up different things to make sure the I do part works. And as we talk, the we do might take a little while, or the we do might be one time the kids get it and we move on, and they do the you do. And so that rehearsal part is gauged as the teachers in the classroom. It's nothing to be held accountable in a bad way, but you know that they're not moving on until the kids get it. And making sure, obviously, there's a positive learning environment. And you've all been in classrooms that probably sometimes it's not the most positive, but that's a different conversation to have. And we'll talk about what that might look like. For students, though, when we're doing the look for, so as you go down that sheet, we'll pick up on 14, and this is student behaviors you're looking at in the classroom. Are they on task, right? I can tell you some of the poorest performing schools I've ever been in, and I've been in several states and several low performing schools, right, for school improvement opportunities. And let me tell you, the amount of off-task behavior was off the charts in schools like that. And, you know, kids in with their headphones on, radios on, their phones on. You know, you just got to find a way to carve out that instructional time and make sure that you're finding ways to convey what the rules of your school are. So you promote on-task behavior and you reward on-task behavior, and trying to think through what that looks like, because sometimes kids need an explicit instruction on what on-task behavior looks like, right? Maybe we haven't explained to them, here's what it looks, here's what you're telling me to on-task behavior looks like. So here's what I need to do to be able to get that. And so going through explicitly explaining what that might look like is what's important. And never assume. You know, Anita talks about assume-aside all the time. Don't assume kids know on-task behavior. So if you're listening to your head on with your headphones on and laying your head down on the desk, what does that tell me? Because believe it or not, some kids might just say, well, I'm tired. It has nothing to do with you. So kind of digging deeper and making sure we understand what those kind of behaviors, again, and not assuming, because at any age along the continuum, kids, you know, have different experiences and different opportunities. So we want to make sure that we're able to make sure we have the same expectations for them as well. And so as we go through this, frequent responses, cooperative responses, again, and this accuracy part is a big thing with Anita too, is making sure like 80% when it's new material, that when they're providing accurate responses, and 90% if it's material that's been during a review. So you kind of hold students accountable to that. Like if they're still not getting it, there's something you need to reteach, redo, or rethink as it goes to that individual student. Obviously appropriate behavior and evidence of learning at the end there. Growth is evident, and if not, what are you doing to kind of, you know, build on those issues that the student's still struggling with? So when we go to independent practice, so we looked at instruction, right? And then we looked at the student piece. Now we're looking at independent work and practice. And so it's a new set. We're starting at 1 here, and that's on that sheet as well. And what you're thinking through is the teacher's assignment selection. You know, it provides content that has been taught, right? So you're not providing them new stuff they've never seen before. And obviously, as if you're an observer, you'll get the deer in the headlight look, like the kids will be like, we've never done this. And so those are the things that you think to yourself, that's a good observation. Students didn't seem to understand what the independent practice was for. It seemed like a new topic, however that might be, however, whatever you've observed. Deliberate practice too, thinking through the, you know, that purpose and that rationale specifically of what you're looking for in the lesson that the teacher's designed. And are you carefully introducing it by task, reviewing directions? I always tell people too, because, you know, the farther I got away from being in the classroom every day, I would get some things in my office turned in and I'd be like, I don't know what the directions are on this. People forget to write the directions at the top of the page. Have you ever had that happen? Think about that. Like when you go somewhere, I'm like, direct, explicit instruction, even for 5-year-olds to 25-year-olds, heck, 55-year-olds, trying to figure out those kinds of things. But making sure that, again, we're purposeful and we're deliberate and it's clear to everybody so kids can hit the target, because we want them to be successful and feel successful. And then we want to verify things as we go through to make sure they're understanding what's going on. We're kind of checking for knowledge and checking for understanding. And if not to us, to a partner, they can explain it. And again, we're building that scaffolding so kids experience success, right? We're not pulling the scaffolding out from underneath and being like, well, you should have known that. I don't know why you don't know that yet. Again, I'm sure you've never been in a classroom like that. I can think of that, man. That sounded like a teacher I had in 19. So when you think through those kinds of things, you just want to make sure that the students have those opportunities. And again, you're moving around the room, monitoring what's taking place as well for that independent practice. I have been in a lot of classrooms, again, unsuccessful ones where teachers sit at the front, they don't move around, bring independent practice, and a lot of independent practices, they're hands down and they're taking a nap. Again, though, my life has been in underperforming schools, not in high performing schools. So making sure I reiterate that, but thinking through those things and making sure that when you circulate, you have something that you can prop them up and try to get them moving in the right direction or work through the problem with them. And as we continue through those independent practice things, again, informative feedback, we're doing those error corrections, affirmative feedback, positive things. Hey, great job. I'm glad you're able to solve that problem. I know you struggled with it last week. I'm glad you figured it out. And talking through feedback to group for grading. And this is a little different of like some things that are repetitive and Anita's mind, group grading. So maybe it's spelling words and everybody, exchanges paper and they check each other's spelling words, whatever it is, it's a repetitive kind of thing that you let students peer review and provide feedback on. I taught writing for kids, process writing. And so we always, before I got it, it had to probably have 4 peer reviews before I take a look at it, because if not, it was atrocious. And even then we had keys that kids would use to do, because writing's a process and we wanted to teach them that process of constant continuous feedback and, redoing the things that, rewrites that you had to do and edits and being able to get thick skin about what you write. And so those are the kind of things that, is important to make sure you think through that feedback to the group too. And again, when feasible, you do that retrieval practice. If it's something that you've been scaffolding and trying to learn and retrieve those answers. I know for a long time that I would say rote information or things that you practiced over and over has been out of fashion. But I told everybody, I think it was the first webinar we did. I'm an English person by trade. I was a high school English teacher, but I am a mathematician like no other, because and I went to school. You got your times tables when you got caught talking. Hard to believe, I know. But I can multiply, divide, do any kind of fraction like the back of my hand, probably from writing all those times tables, which I know it bores everybody out there like, oh my God, you can't do that anymore. But there is something to rote practice, because I probably can spell better than anybody and probably have a really good retrieval of, 12 times 12 is 144, or I can divide quickly too. So there comes things that have to be there has to be some automaticity to general facts. And so what are the ways that you do that? And that retrieval practice is one of them. And then again, when we're looking for independent practice, we flip the switch on what we're looking for students and making sure here that obviously we're looking through that on task behavior. Again, we're just pulling it all back together. Their cooperative responses. We're going to say the accuracy for that independent work again, because some of these things seem repetitive, but this is under students' independent work, appropriate behavior, and evidence of learning, right? So if they're not getting it, what are we doing as the instructor to make sure they get it? And so that's kind of the issue too, is sometimes we just move on and hope they get it. Well, I know pacing guides, and don't get me started on all that, but there comes a time when, especially in certain areas, especially when we're doing explicit instruction with new material, there has to come a time that we want to make sure kids, again, master it 80 to 90%, and that we're building that scaffolding in for kids that are still not up to the level that we'd like them to be. So far, thoughts, ideas on the checklist itself. Is it helpful? Do you see yourself using it? Just curious. I'll practice my wait time. Good, Erica. Thank you, Catherine. Good. It's helpful. Okay. So I hate to give you stuff that's not helpful. And again, I want you to take something away that you can use. So, all right. So great. We'll keep going through. And again, these things are things that once you've taught explicit instruction, right? The components, the things, then you hold people accountable as you do your walkthroughs. It's not that you just, okay, we're going to do this, you got to do the front work, right? You got to front load a little bit. So it's, again, what you're looking for in that, because you do need to teach what explicit instruction is first. All right, so let's keep going. So when we do the observation, here's where we're going to have glows and we're going to have grows. You can call it peanuts and popcorn. I don't care. But what it is in here, and Anita likes it this way, is obviously your glows were your positive things, your grows are areas you're still going to try to grow and improve upon. And I think those words are heard better. And so no one has that instant shutdown. And everybody probably has an idea of something that they've had, different words that they've used on a feedback form. And whatever you use, again, you can put in wherever you want. But again, here it's to open up the mind of the person receiving the information. So they want to grow and glow. And so when we have that, that's just kind of how those notes would be looking. At the very bottom of that sheet, it says glows and grows actually on the worksheet that you guys have. And so if we look at this, I'm just going to go really quickly through this, but we're going to go through the glows and we're going to go through the grows, and the observation folks are taking their notes. And so it always relates back to big ideas to look for us, right? And you've got those in front of you. And to student learning, right? Are the kids getting it? Are they applying it? And then again, on focus on attributes that can be used in future lessons across domains. So something we've taught, again, are we able to recycle back through and pull it back through with us? So we're, I don't say spiraling the curriculum, but building upon that and able to have them retrieve the information at a later time. And there's no limit on glows, right? You can write as many as you like as the time that you're in there. If you're in there 5 minutes, to 15, you're going to have, I would think, well, it just depends on the superstar you're seeing, right? Okay. And so here's an example. Again, I don't need to read. I'm not going to read the next few examples through. I'll read this one through to you though, but they're in 7th grade language arts. The glows they were prepared. It's super short. See, it's not this long drawn out novella. Room arrangement. And so that was one of the things they were looking at, right? So students facing the teacher, students can work with partners, teaching arena established. So the sage on the stage is right at the front. And I say that in a bad way, but there is a teaching arena. So kids know this is where I focus. And the teacher can easily monitor students. So there's no barriers. You're not tripping over stuff. You've been in those classrooms. Good Lord. I said one day to somebody, I said, okay, you're a fire hazard. We need to get some of the stuff out. And they're like, well, I can't get rid of all those egg cartons and toilet paper wrappers. I'm like, it's a fire hazard. We've got to give it. We'll figure things out. But I started offering classroom makeovers to folks because it was my anxiety when I would walk through and I thought, oh my gosh, somebody in that classroom's got to feel the same way. So we would start doing, any volunteer wanted to do classroom makeovers. We would come in and kind of do like the, HGTV, but it'd be school TV related. So maybe that's something to work into. If you implement explicit instruction, we're going to give away so many classroom makeovers. And then the objective here is what they were looking at. So they wanted to make sure in those classrooms, the objective they saw, and it just simply says, it's pretty easy. It says objective posted and introduced after necessary vocabulary taught, and the objective revisited at the end of the lesson. So, okay, good. Here's another one. And again, here's the areas they looked at. Glows were frequent responses and in-class assignment. These are the 2 areas they were looking at, individuals and partners. And again, just some samples of what that could look like as you do those feedback sections. Again, they're taking notes. And this is instructional practices again, same thing. And then again, it's, the grows. This is the part you might want to have a conversation and actually limit it to 1 to 3. So don't overwhelm them and think through what thing do you really want them to work on that they're going to be open-minded to hear. And maybe that's something you're working on across that grade level, right? Focus their attributes that can be used future lessons across again. And then again, you're making sure that it's increasing student success. We're not getting hung up on little things that have nothing to do with student success. Like your shade was crooked in your classroom and it bothered me. No, we're not going to do stuff like that. But the bigger picture, right? The student success things and high leverage attributes, things I said, things that are going to more bang for our buck. It's those things with high effect, high outcomes. So don't be doing those little ding-dongy things that have no effect and no outcomes for students. And that's all the Hattie stuff that we talked about. Okay, so here's an example of the grow. Don't talk over the group after you've given directions, right? So if it's loud in the classroom and she's talking over it, nobody's getting it, right? You're all everybody's scattered in the room. So the note underneath is like, if additional information is necessary, regain attention and convey information to the group. So bring everybody back together. Don't talk over the top of them. and you are teaching them how to respond appropriately. So you're modeling to your students how you want them to respond. So don't talk over the top of them. But I liked that one because it gave them what they observed, but it also gave them a little hint to how to get better, right? And it's just that time for the teacher to think, okay, and sometimes that's a behavior thing. Like that's a rules thing to me, a procedures thing. I didn't teach the procedures that when we do group work, here's how it rolls in my class. And then you don't assume kids know how to behave, because in groups, they don't know how to behave until you show them how to behave. And then when you monitor and circulate, be sure that you're connecting with all students. So again, another observation. And then they said, you always monitor to the left side. So then they know exactly like, oh, I'll have to break it up. And however you do that, whatever your dominant side is, you have a tendency to go that way. So it's just making a conscious effort to change that. This is the part we talked about a little bit about too. So at that building level, you're thinking about how can we do some professional development? What are those areas of needs? Again, you've got to do a professional development assessment, needs assessment. Some of that can play into it by these things. You say we did a school walkthroughs and we observed and we brought the data together and here's what it showed us. We needed to do blank and blank. And so it's those things that you want to take a little bit deeper study on and a review on. So what instructional procedures should we study, review? And that's as that collective group. And then individually, what are some of the things that when you observe the individuals, here's some of the grows that they saw, what do you do after that? Are you going to go back and observe? Maybe there were some things that they wanted you to come back and give them more input on after they corrected it and see how they're doing. And then maybe it was a conversation that says, hey, how about if I know you're really working on blank strategy. How about if I send in the instructional coach and they work with you on it and help alleviate any concerns you might have and give you some resources and support as you go through that? Because our job is to make you grow. Our job's not, aha, I got you. Our job is to improve instructional quality. And that's all about the teacher. And that's that grow part. The glows are just things that you're so happy about that you want to share with your building, right? And so what we used to do, and this is like 15 years ago that we started doing this, but it was kind of groundbreaking at the time, is we put, well, now it's iPads. You just give everybody an iPad, let them record. A buddy would record a teacher in the classroom. Again, whatever your contract says. But at the time we worked through their union and just said, this is not, I don't want to see these videos. This is just for the teachers. They can delete them after they do it. But it was that opportunity to really see what their instruction looks at. It was the biggest ahas teachers ever had. But it was all about the grow and the glow. Right? They did some things really well. And they did some things like, oh, I never, how many times did I say that? Or, boy, I stood on that side for 2 hours over there. I never moved away from my desk. But they found those things and reflected upon it. And what's the biggest way to change behavior? Let them see where they need to change and think about that. And so when we get into the grows and grows for individuals, that type of follow-up, what should occur and how would, it depends on the item, obviously, right? And so for those glows, is there additional affirmation needed? Do you want to share what they did really well with your staff at a staff meeting or staff training or, a little blurb in the thing? And that you kind of have to feel out. Does the person feel comfortable being, shared upon, their information shared? Most teachers are performers, so they don't mind it, but there's introverts in the world that don't want any attention drawn to them and they would feel uncomfortable with that. So it's always that conversation with them. And maybe just say, hey, I don't have to say that I was in your classroom, but I want to share what happened and how good it was. I can leave the name and grade level out and just share how great that opportunity was. And then again, if they allow you to do it, create videos to illustrate specific instructional things that you saw. So it just promotes that, opportunity to grow professionally. When we look at the procedures and the practices, this is all pretty self-explanatory. And again, it's not rocket science, but it's the preparation part. You're going to develop a shared body of knowledge and language. So again, that pre-calibration, you're talking through everything. And you can even use that worksheet or the walkthrough sheet I gave you to talk through all that. What's that mean and calibrate what it is that means when you see that. And then provide that staff development for everybody on explicit instruction. And then the administrators would be observing videos of teachers, recording glows and grows and sharing out the observations with colleagues and making sure that the videos and that were there. So teachers were able to see it as well. So that's that front loading, preparing. Prior to going out, you're going to determine the members on the walkthrough team, obviously, and this just step-by-step talks you through all the steps. List the teachers that you plan to visit and what you're hoping on. Maybe they want to volunteer to do it. Maybe there's mandatory volunteerism too as a walkthrough, that happens too. And maybe there's people that love to have you in the classroom. You decide that on your site, your staff the best. And again, it's all about professional growth. It is not about evaluation. And again, gathering your team members to review for those look-fors and thinking through, we talked about that. You train your team before you go out and do your observations. Okay, and then this is just telling you in the classroom, distribute about around the room, try not to disrupt the flow of the lesson. So maybe at the beginning of the year, it's a conversation that's shared with all classes, right? And maybe your first walkthrough is like, hey, I'm just here. And throughout the year, you're going to see me in and out of the classroom. Don't sweat it. I'm just here to hang out for a while. And putting that in is just procedurally, this is what it looks like in a day in the life. And again, you observe and record. You talk about student learning, what are you if you're in the classroom and students are in a small group and you want to ask, what are you learning? Why are you learning this? I mean, sometimes I don't know. And how do you know when you have learned it? That's always the one that stumps them. There'll be a smarty pants in there that'll tell you that right away. But that also has the opportunity for you to have future growth, right? And future opportunities. Because kids that can master all these things, you have a high level of learning taking place in the classroom. So those questions being answered, they get it, right? And if not, that's where you're aspiring to be. When you walk through those classrooms, kids are able to answer those questions. And again, when you leave, the leader leaves the room, the rest of the team, flows with you and flows out. And so again, you do your debrief on step 4. And again, we've kind of talked through it. So you record the stuff, you share the glows, you share the grows. And, they say, Anita's always suggests just use it on the iPad and share the information, verbally, and then just send it to whatever the glows and grows are that you had. And that leader does it, whoever the team leader is, they send that information to them. And then with the teacher, again, we talk through this part, the class coverage. Obviously, the one person provides the feedback, you email the feedback. And it's immediate feedback. Wow, that's a change. It was as a high school English teacher too. Kids loved immediate feedback on their writing. I mean, I would spend all weekend reading papers and providing explicit feedback for them to get them better at writing. I was miserable for many, many, many years on that. But at the time, that's the only way I knew that make sure kids could do the writing process well. And so it took that immediate feedback. But boy, I couldn't teach I always tell her, but I couldn't be a PE teacher because I couldn't take the noise. So my cross was totally different than the person that had to be the teacher. And I knew that when I, majored in English. So, and I think that result of immediate feedback makes people feel really good one way or the other. And it's doneness, right? Everybody likes that completion and that doneness of opportunity. When you think through some of these, you just kind of think through that opportunity to discuss the professional development. We've talked through that already. So this is that step 6 about if you're doing things for the building, what it might look like. And, again, it's all based on how comfortable that teacher feels with you sharing the information. You can do it real generically if they don't want their name, because some folks are introverts, believe it or not. I know that's hard to believe as a teacher, but it happens. And so we're getting close. Again, we've had some conversation throughout, but we're right at the end here. And I feel bad because I'll stay on as long as you want. But I want to make sure, is there anything, do you think this process works in your building, would work in your building? If you could, just kind of drop in the chat box with us because we have a minute here, and I'll take any questions as well as we wrap up. And I'm happy to stay on as long as you need me to answer any questions. So here we go. Yeah, it is pretty simple, Kara. So I'm thinking through, yeah, and keeping it simple is a good thing, right? But really hammering out the process and writing it down, because I tell everybody, if it's not written down, it doesn't exist, and you share it with everybody. Great, Katie, thank you. I'm glad it's something you think you could do. And it's a conversation piece. The page that the handout that I gave you is really what explicit instruction looks like. So, right, Catherine's right. The handout's going to make it easier to have the conversation, right? And so that we can have conversations around this and making sure you do the front loading of training teachers of what explicit instruction is. And if you guys need help, I'll talk to you here. I'll keep watching the chat, but you can reach me here on my email if you need any training or any follow-up related to explicit instruction. I'm always happy to help folks out. I can come on site. I can do anything webinar wise as well. God, we all hate Zoom at this point, but it is certainly convenient. Today it's so nice and sunny out. I'm looking out in my neighborhood and I realize, oh, it's still 40 degrees outside. So, but I can do this anytime, anywhere, and support you guys in any way that you might need. Okay, so we've come to the end. Again, I'll stay on if anybody has questions, but I always like to make sure everybody knows at 4 o'clock they can bounce out. We'll see you next time on webinar 6. And it is about that intrinsic and extraneous cognitive loads. And boy, we really have a problem with this in classrooms. So it's something to really think about, because again, it goes back to that planning piece and making sure we're really able to not overload kids or teachers, and as a matter of fact. So I hope everybody has a great, well, heck, tomorrow's March 1st. Have a great March, and we'll see you at the end of March. Anna, I like the ongoing process. I have to implement them for a few times a year for collecting. Great. Thanks for sharing, Anna. Thanks
All right,
for
Gina, thank you so much, Gina, for sharing this wonderful information with us. Appreciate the handout, all the applications for walkthroughs here for explicit instruction. As Gina mentioned, this is our 5th in the series. I posted a link to the YouTube playlist that's got the other 4. I'll be adding this one to it tomorrow, and we'll be sending that link out to all registrants, even those who weren't able to attend the session with us today. They'll get a link to the recording. If you made it for the full hour, you'll get a link to an evaluation that, when completed, will send Illinois participants the ISB evidence of completion form for 1 PD clock hour for today's attendance. So I'll stop the recording now.